This is Resonant Truth with Lisa Starr here on the YouTube version. I'm a podcast host primarily, and you can find my podcast Natural Time on all the platforms, or most of them. But I really wanted to challenge myself to have a visual medium and a weekly program that would show up on YouTube. So you found it. And I'm going to be devoting this time to Mayan astrology exclusively, although I often storytell to make little anecdotal references to what's happening in the passages that we follow here. I made an intro episode, although I feel like it's really self-centered. It's like introduction to me. It should be like introduction to the Mayan teachings, but I have that at my website, resonanttruth.com, and there is also a podcast that's an introduction to the calendars. And so there might be a video here eventually that's more of that, but meanwhile, this is just a check-in each week going into things that are happening right here and now in Mayan time or natural time. So the big deal that's happening right now is that we're starting a 13-day Mayan phase, which is called a Wavespell. Everything in the Mayan time that we've sort of modernized the language around it, but it's the same original pattern, is a count of 13. And any count of 13 is now got the moniker of being a wave spell. And that's so cool. And I'll explain about that as we go along. But we're starting a 13-day wave spell today, which incidentally is like Sunday, January 7th. I'm not good at the Gregorian calendar. But we just began this 13-day cycle today, and it is about the blue storm for 13 days. Every cycle in the Mayan teaching has an origination day, and then the cycle is following in that first day's like vortex of energy, and its description of life is like on high for the 13-day time. So today is called Blue Magnetic Storm, and it is the first day of 13 celebrating Blue Storm. And Blue Storm is a really exciting and sometimes overwhelming time frame that acts just like the storms we encounter in nature. In nature, a storm seems like a deluge of rain and eruptive thunder and lightning. It can be disturbing. It can be destructive. It is replenishing the earth with rain that we often need, but there's something kind of violent or invasive often, in the description of a storm. Is just that it's almost like the sky is angry. And I think that's current and valid right now. But the way I've also learned to understand sort of the actual meteorology of a storm and to bring it into Mayan spirituality is that a storm is really releasing pressure, barometric pressure in the sky. So there'll be a buildup of pressure, of condensation from all of the evaporating that's happened from the ocean or the waterways of our Earth's surface during hotter, warmer weather that will accumulate in the sky and become too gravitationally heavy to hang out up there. It wants to fall. And that kind of rupturing, mixing, condensation is what ends up being the explosion of a storm. So you can also think about the mood that you might be in wintertime, if that's when rain is most prevalent where you live. Then in winter, we have these gray, overcast days that are kind of like the word stultifying. Or, it rains a lot on the east coast of the US in the summer and many other places. And it's the same thing. There's just like kind of like this condensation fog. And it can feel almost like it can give you a headache because it is so intense. So when it rains, it's a release of that pressure. And on the other side of the rain, the sun comes out. And so storm is actually or a way to reframe that it's like an angry, destructive, invasive weather front is, it is the means that the sky returns itself to light. And I have to confess here that I was born in the Mayan astrology as a blue storm person. I was born on a blue storm day. And so maybe I have a way of manipulating everyone to be like, it's not just shitty weather and foul weather and anger, rage and sorrow. You know, the sky is not just crying. You know, storm is the moment when we're pushing for clarity, but we have to push through this outburst of rain. So that's my opinion about the time we're in, is that you can treat it, or the experiences you may be having for the next couple of weeks could have the character of being explosive and eruptive and disruptive and intense, and you can't like relax in it. But there is also the picture that it's a process getting us back to clarity and joy. You know, what the sun is, a smiling sun that gives us light and heat. And there is another thing that I want to offer, which is that there is a place within the meteorology of a storm, which is the center of the storm. The eye of the hurricane is totally calm. And so I've been really inviting people that follow my work to do some imagining of like, well, where is the center of the storm? If it's going to be intense and disruptive, there's lots of spirituality and lots of teachings that are about calming oneself in the midst of that. And that would be so useful right now, because it's still like a choice. The storm could be so intense at a certain point you don't have like any thought, you don't have a powerful thought that will take you out of the intensity you're experiencing. You can't go, I need to find my way to the center of this. You might just be in the place where you're consumed by the drama of life. But in the beginning, or maybe I'll remind you halfway, I'll remind myself, like right now, I think I'll give you an example. Today's blue magnetic storm, I was invited to do something with a friend, and I'm just not, I'm pretty solitary. I'm a pretty solitary person. And so while it was fun, it was like also disarming. I wasn't really at peace, because I was learning how to integrate like hanging out with someone for a few hours. And so this is exactly the moment where after that I felt not calm. I felt anxious. I felt stirrings of discontent. Like, why did I do that? Or that wasn't what I needed to do today. How did that kind of happen? And you want to almost jump in and go, well, then fuck it. I won't do any of the things I wanted to do today because I got off track. And I sort of fought with myself to say, like, I mean, that's a friend and that was fine. It doesn't always have to be perfect, but like, I don't want to lose the rest of my day to chaos. There is a calmer central place for me to hang out, the center of the storm. And part of that's doing this, like talking about the storm is helping me be in the center of it. So you'll have your own version of that. I really encourage you. We just had the White World Bridger Wavespell, and it was about death for 13 days. And death feels very still compared to a storm. It's a passing, but it is a very like wide open beatific state, as well as one that kills our ego, because death takes away our control or our sense of power over our destiny. In my life, I was not a direct witness, but I was like not far from directly experiencing human death. 2 lives were lost in my midst. One was an infant who died in childbirth, and the other was someone my age dying of cancer. And so there was nothing natural about either. But the world bridge of White World Bridger, the Wavespell of death, was really a natural orientation to crossing the world bridge and going to the other place, however we describe that. So we've had something that I feel like the power and weight is about stillness and shifts that are so big that they almost don't feel like movement, you know? Storm is going to be quicker moving action. So it's kind of an abrupt change and one to be ready for, which is why I'm talking about it. Now, I am going to direct you to my podcast for all the descriptions about the other layers of natural time. And it's partly because I want to leave these YouTube videos up to stand to be listened to again, because we will continually pass through this junction point of the end of White World Bridger and the beginning of Blue Storm. Like, this is going to happen every 260 days. So I'm going to just let this particular vocalization of the Mayan count be about the wave spells that make up the Zolkin count of 260 days. And I think since some of you might be listening to me for the first time, I do want to just put out there that I'm a school teacher, mostly a substitute, but I teach middle school almost exclusively. And so they're always learning things that are really interesting to me, because it's like the curriculum is meant to match like the adolescent waking brain and hormonal state, the transit from childhood to adulthood, the 12-year-old, the 13-year-old. So I'm going to be teaching them about the age of exploration, was when they so-called discovered the New World, the Americas. And of course, it's a progressive school, so we're going to not talk about that as a victory. We're going to talk about colonization as an incredible genocide, or at least show that all these brave naval men who made it across the ocean and an unknown destination, and got from Europe to this continent where I live, that they also just destroyed what was here, mostly through smallpox and disease and ill intent. And I am going to be teaching them about the Maya, because I know so much. I know enough to teach middle school kids. And one of the things I learned just reading through kind of adolescent level descriptions of the Maya, I relearned it actually, is that they're not quite sure where the 260-day calendar came from. They think it was like something to do with the cycle of Venus, like Venus's trajectory around the sun, the way that the Earth's trajectory around the sun, the orbit takes 365 days. They're like, oh, maybe it has to do with Venus's orbit around the sun. And I don't think that's accurate. I would have to Google, but no, that's not what it is. The Maya were incredible astronomers, and I liked when I taught this class before, quite a while ago, I was so excited to explain to them that the Maya stargazed by building a little sling, at a window, and putting your chin in the sling and recording what you witnessed each night, overnight, happening. And maybe they were monks or spiritual scientists who had this job, but it would last for generations. So they recorded star movements from that one fixed position, but with just eyesight. They didn't have, obviously, spy glasses. And they became so deeply knowledgeable about the movement of the astronomical, star system, that they did derive information from astronomy in order to create their sacred calendar. But we can't necessarily see their sacred calendar, the Zolkin, that's 260 days long. We can't really see that as some easy astronomical recognized cycle. But it's buried in there. They didn't just come up with it arbitrarily. And it is the same as gestation in the womb. So maybe that's the answer, is that they didn't pick a calendar based on astronomy. They picked a calendar based on what it takes from conception to birth for a human being, because that is accurate. Conception to birth is 260 days, roughly. It's give or take 10 days, but it's pretty accurate. It's pretty magical. And also 260 days for the Maya, particularly the ancient Maya, when all this originated, was the time it took to germinate a seed kernel of corn from germination to full corn harvest of that plant. And corn was everything. So corn was everything because it was the sustaining crop. It was the one they discovered, the colonists, when they came to the New World, as this new crop, the crop of corn. But it had actually been genetically cultivated by the Maya to be superb or just like absolutely like a very, what is the word, like prodigiously profligate plant, making so many kernels in order to feed everyone. So that's just like a tiny background on the Tzolk'in that I want to focus on here. And I want to explain that we are, of course, going to be in this blue storm wave spell for 13 days. And so I plan to do my YouTube tutorial teaching every week. So already a week from now, we'll be well into the very heart of the blue storm time, the middle of the 13-day wave spell. And you might want to make sure you tune into Natural Time, the podcast, if you want to kind of go through the days more slowly or in more detail. But that it's important to just notice, like, if we're going to meet every week here, then we're going to basically be like introducing a wave spell and then in the wave spell and then saying goodbye to the wave spell and on to the next one. And so it might be helpful for you to know the order of the wave spells that have already come, because the Tzolk'in is 260 days long and there are 20 13-day wave spells. There are 20 day signs that are celebrated in the Tzolk'in, and they each get 13 days. So currently, I think we're on the 7th of 20 wave spells. The very first one was Red Dragon for 13 days, and then we had White Wizard for 13 days. Red Dragon is about the divine feminine goddess, like that we're all born from. The originator of life comes from this divine feminine womb. And White Wizard is the shaman who does all the healing, the jaguar shaman for the Maya. So we celebrated each of them. And then we had Blue Hand, which originally was like about the deer. And the deer has antlers, and our hands are like our antlers. They're also really receptive and sensitive, like antennae. So we had Blue Hand, and then we had Yellow Sun, which I loved. We can be like, oh, I remember that wave spell. I loved it. It was about enlightenment. I went back to a Buddhist monastery and I was so happy. I was just sitting for their Sunday service, but I was reminded of all the like seeking of enlightenment I've done in my lifetime and all those spiritual disciplines I've tried. And that one is so special. And so Yellow Sun is for sure for 13 days we kind of get pushed into the feeling of enlightenment and being seekers and being connected to divinity, being full of light. And then we had Red Skywalker, which is a time to celebrate plant spirit medicine. The Skywalker is the picture of being high out of our body on something. And then when we're in the sky or high, we get a prophecy and then we bring it back and share it. I think that 13-day cycle in modern times forces us to see where we habitually make an escape from being here and present, i.e., what is our addiction profile. And we're not all addicts, but most people are by now conditioned to consume and overconsume. And the addiction isn't just drugs and alcohol, i.e. plant spirit medicine. It's addiction to relationships and addiction to food and addiction to I was just thinking about like, yeah, gambling and all that stuff, but there's also just like just having an addictive disposition, and no matter what you do it to excess. I mean, we're all addicted to the internet. So anyway, Red Skywalker is that. And actually the internet is very Red Skywalker, right? Just like I look at my computer and suddenly I am on the other side of the world learning about this. So like what part of me is left in my body when my imagination is following that thread? After Red Skywalker was White World Bridger, the Wavespell of Death that we just had. And then now we have Blue Storm. And just to kind of finish the thought of the next few cycles, we follow Blue Storm with Yellow Human and then Red Serpent, White Mirror. And that takes us halfway through 130 days through the Zolkin of 260 days. So you can get a feel for how we're like a third, almost a third in, or maybe just exactly about a third through the Zolkin. Yeah, I want to remind you that if this is like just a touchstone, doesn't feel like a lot of information, and there's so much at my website, resonanttruth.com. I've been at this for a very long time. It's like my 25th year, I think. And so there's stuff I've written there about the different tribes. And the podcast is called Natural Time, which is a more frequent way for me to tell you about the cycles. And I am, like I said, explicitly covering, like it was an event, the wave spells of the Zolkin, but there's a whole other set of sort of calendar study that we do in Natural Time, which is about the 13 moon calendar, and I talk about that in the podcast, as well as the year that we're in. We start a new year in the Mayan teaching on July 26th. So even though it's considered Gregorian New Year in January, we're already halfway through, like we're in the center of our Mayan year when people considered a Gregorian New Year. So it's almost a direct inversion or opposite of the Gregorian calendar that way. So I talk about all that in my podcast. And now you know. Hey, YouTube. One of the things I said in my intro is it's just like very uncomfortable for me to see myself on camera. So why not do it? That is a total Blue Storm experience where you just really actually do make radical change. I would expect you to see radical disruptions and radical change in your life for this time.